My name is Luna. I'm 29 years old, and if you met me, you'd probably assume I'm unemployed. I wear oversized hoodies, spend 16 hours a day staring at screens, and I rent a minimalist apartment in Boise, Idaho that has exactly one chair. My father, Timothy, calls me a parasite. He runs a construction crew, the kind of work you feel in your back every morning, and to him, if you aren't sweating, you aren't working. Digital hobo, he calls me. Useless. He screamed that at me 3 weeks ago. Standing in my living room, face red, veins popping in his neck. You're almost 30, Luna. Playing video games while your sister is out there closing deals. Get out. I'm done enabling you. He didn't know the video games were actually me managing the back-end infrastructure for a global AI network. He didn't know I cleared $32 million last year. So when he threw me out, I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I just picked up my laptop, smiled, and left. Before we see how much he regrets that, drop a comment and let me know where you're listening from. I love seeing how far our community reaches. I moved into a rental property the next day. It wasn't just an apartment. It was a fortress of glass and steel overlooking the foothills, fully wired with enterprise-grade fiber optics. The kind of place where the rent is more than most people's mortgage, but to me it was just a line item. A necessary expense for peace. I set up my servers in the second bedroom. The humming was constant, a low, steady vibration that felt like a heartbeat. This was my empire. Invisible, silent, and incredibly lucrative. My sister Isla, on the other hand, lived her life at maximum volume. She was 26, a luxury real estate agent who sold more lifestyle than actual property. Her Instagram was a curated feed of open houses, champagne toasts, and her new Tesla Model X, a car I knew my father had co-signed for because her credit was maxed out. The contrast between us was almost comical. Isla was the golden child, the one who inherited my mother Carrie's obsession with status and my father's loud, blustering confidence. I was the mistake, the weird one who liked code better than people. For years I'd let them believe it. I let them think I was scraping by on freelance gigs, fixing websites for pennies. Why? 'Cause it was easier. It was a tax I paid for my freedom. Call it the silent tax. See, in families like mine, success isn't celebrated. It's consumed. If they knew what I really made, I wouldn't be a daughter anymore. Be a bank. I'd be the funding source for Isla's next bad investment, for my father's failing business, for my mother's country club dues. So I paid the tax of their insults. I let them call me a failure because being a failure meant they left me alone. It was a transaction. My dignity for my peace. But the tax was getting expensive. A neighbor stopped me by the mailboxes a few days after I moved in. "Oh, Luna," she said, her voice dripping with that fake, pitying sweetness. "Your mother told me you're taking some time off. For your recovery." Froze. Recovery. "She said you were in a program," the neighbor continued, whispering now. "For the video game addiction. And the depression. It's so brave of you to get help." I stared at her. They weren't just calling me lazy anymore. They were rewriting my reality. Isla and Carrie were running a whisper campaign, telling the entire community I was in rehab to explain why I had no real job and lived alone. It was brilliant in a sick way. It garnered them sympathy, the poor, suffering parents of the troubled daughter, while discrediting anything I might say in the future. Who believes the crazy girl in rehab? I smiled at the neighbor. Ideally, recovery takes time, I said and walked away. Inside my apartment, the silence felt different. It wasn't peaceful anymore. It was heavy. The humming of the servers sounded less like a heartbeat and more like a countdown. I sat in my ergonomic chair, looking at the monitors, at the flow of data that represented more wealth than my entire family had generated in 3 generations. They thought I was weak. They thought I was broken. They had no idea that while they were building rumors, I was building a war chest. The silent tax was no longer enough. I was done paying for peace that I never actually received. I started digging. Not into code but into them. I pulled my credit reports, my old bank statements, everything. I needed to know if their disrespect was just words, or if it had bled into my finances. And then, on a Tuesday morning, I saw it. A notification from a municipal bond account I'd forgotten about. It was a settlement from a car accident when I was 12, held jointly with my parents until I turned 30. The balance was zero. $28,000, withdrawn 4 days ago. The transaction receipt was digital, but the authorization signature was mine. Or rather, a shaky, pixelated version of my signature that looked suspiciously like my mother's handwriting. I stared at the screen. $28,000. To me it was a rounding error. I made that in a bad week. But to them, that was a fortune. And they had stolen it. They had committed a felony, forged my name, and drained the account. I checked the date again. It matched perfectly with an Instagram post from Isla. Venue secured. The dream engagement party is happening. She had posted a photo of the deposit receipt. It was exactly $28,000. My phone buzzed. It was Jared, my cousin. Jared was the family accountant, a quiet guy who usually kept his head down to avoid Timothy's wrath. "Did you authorize a withdrawal?" he asked, his voice tight. "Because I'm looking at the books for your dad's construction firm, and there's a weird inflow of cash that went straight out to a wedding venue. And Luna, it's listed as a personal loan from you." "I didn't loan them anything, Jared," I said, my voice calm. "They forged my signature." "I thought so," he sighed. "Look, I'm tired, Luna. I'm tired of fixing their messes. Timothy's business is underwater. He's defaulting on everything. This bond money, it's a drop in the bucket. He's drowning and he's dragging everyone down with him." "Send me the files," I said. "Everything you have on the business. The loans, the debts, the creditors. All of it." "Luna, what are you going to do?" "I'm going to stop paying the tax," I said. I hung up and dialed my mother. She answered on the second ring, sounding breathless and annoyed. "Luna, can't talk right now. We're meeting the florist for Isla's party." "Did you take the money from my bond account?" "Yes." No preamble. No emotion. Just the question. There was a pause. A beat of silence that screamed guilt. "Oh, that," she said, her tone shifting to that breezy dismissive dismissal she used when she was caught. "Yes, well, we needed it for the deposit. The venue required cash up front, and your father's liquidity is a little tied up right now. We knew you wouldn't mind. It was just sitting there, gathering dust. You forged my signature, Mom. That's a felony." "Don't be dramatic," she snapped. "It's family money. We raised you. We fed you. Think of it as reimbursement. Besides, what were you going to do with it? Buy more video games? Isla is building a life. She needs it. Family helps family, Luna. You should be happy to contribute." And there it was. The narcissistic math. To them, I wasn't a person with rights or property. I was an appliance. Resource. If the toaster is sitting on the counter, you don't ask it for permission to make toast. You just use it. In their minds, that money didn't belong to me because I didn't belong to me. I belonged to them. They weren't stealing. They were just reclaiming a resource from a defective part of themselves. The last shred of guilt I had evaporated. It was replaced by a clarity so cold it burned. "You're right," I said softly. "Family helps family. I'll keep that in mind." Hung up. I didn't call the police. I didn't call a lawyer to sue them for the 28 grand. That would be messy. That would be loud. And I was done being loud. I wanted to be effective. I opened the files Jared had sent. Timothy's construction business was a disaster. He was leveraged to the hilt. But there was one creditor that kept popping up. A regional bank that held the mortgage on his equipment, his office, and his payroll loans. I ran a quick search on the bank. They were in trouble too. Overexposed to bad commercial debt, looking to offload distressed assets to clean up their balance sheet before a quarterly audit. My father's loans were distressed assets. I picked up my other phone, the one I used for business. I dialed my broker in New York. "David," I said, "I need you to buy a debt portfolio. A regional bank in Idaho. I want everything they have on a company called Timothy Construction. And I want it done through a blind trust. No names. Distressed construction debt?" David asked. "That's risky, Luna." "Not for me," I said. "It's not an investment. It's an acquisition." 3 days later, the paperwork was digital ink on my screen. I owned him. I owned the cranes, the trucks, the building he sat in, and the debt he couldn't pay. I was no longer his daughter. I was his institution. But I wasn't done. I remembered something else Timothy had mocked me for. Years ago, when I was first learning to code, I'd built a logistics program to help him track his trucks. He'd laughed at it. "Nerd stuff," he'd called it. I don't need a computer to tell me where my drivers are. I dug into the network logs Jared had sent. The construction firm was running on a software backbone that looked familiar. Pulled the source code. It was my code. He was using a pirated, patchworked version of the prototype I'd built when I was 22. He hadn't updated it in 7 years. It was the central nervous system of his entire operation, and he was running it illegally. I owned the copyright, and I owned the debt. I sat back in my chair. The engagement party was in 2 days. They were going to be celebrating Isla's future, funded by my stolen money, while standing on ground that I now owned. It was time to introduce myself. Not as Luna the failure, but as Luna the architect. I started typing a command into my terminal. A remote audit script. It would ping every device on his network, verify the software license, and if it failed, which it would lock the system. Total gridlock. No trucks moving. No supplies ordered. No bids submitted. I didn't hit enter yet. I wanted to look him in the eye when the lights went out. Saturday night. The engagement dinner was at the Chop House, the most expensive steakhouse in Boise. Dark wood, leather booths, waiters in white jackets. The kind of place my parents loved because it smelled like money they didn't have. I arrived 15 minutes late. I wasn't wearing a hoodie. I was wearing a structured black blazer, tailored trousers, and heels that clicked sharply on the marble floor. I looked like what I was. A woman who could buy the building. I walked into the private dining room. They were all there. Timothy was holding a glass of wine, looking flushed and loud. Carrie was preening next to Isla, who was showing off her ring to the fiancé. A nice guy named Mark who looked like he had no idea what he was marrying into. The room went silent when I walked in. "Luna," Carrie said, her voice shrill. "What are you doing here? You weren't invited." "You're embarrassing us," Timothy growled, standing up. "Look at you. Did you come to beg for money? Or just to ruin your sister's night? Get out." I didn't flinch. I didn't yell. I walked to the head of the table, right next to Timothy. I placed a single, thin folder on the white tablecloth. "I'm not here to eat," I said, my voice calm, carrying perfectly in the silent room. "And I'm not here to beg. I'm here to collect." Timothy laughed. It was a nervous, blustering sound. "Collect what?" "Your allowance." "Open the folder," I said. He hesitated, then grabbed it, sneering. He flipped it open. The first page was the deed to his construction loans, transferred to my holding company. The second page was the forensic accounting report showing the forged signature on the bond. The third page was a cease and desist order for the software copyright infringement. I watched his face. It went from red to white in 3 seconds. He looked up at me, and for the first time in my life, I didn't see contempt in his eyes. "Saw fear. You," he whispered. "You bought the debt." "All of it," I said. "You're in default, Timothy. Technically, I own the chair you're sitting in." Carrie stood up, trembling. "What is this? What is she talking about? She tricked us." Timothy screamed, slamming the folder shut. "She tricked us. She's been hiding money. She's a snake." "I didn't hide anything," I said. "You just never looked. You stole from us." Isla shrieked, realizing her party was crashing. "You selfish witch. This is my night." "Actually," I said, turning to Mark, the fiancé. "The $28,000 that paid for this night was stolen from me. By them. Forged signature. Felony fraud. I thought you should know before you legally bind your finances to this family." Mark stood up, looking from me to Isla, horror dawning on his face. "It's a lie," Carrie shouted. "We raised her. She owes us everything." "The narcissistic math doesn't work in court, Mom," I said. "Here are the terms. You have 24 hours to repay the $28,000 in full. If you don't, I file the fraud charges. And Timothy, if you don't surrender the company assets to the holding firm by Monday morning, I trigger the software lockout. Your trucks won't start. Your office won't open. It's over." I turned and walked out. I didn't look back. I heard Timothy shouting, Carrie sobbing, and the distinct sound of a ring hitting a plate as Mark asked a very quiet, very serious question. I walked out into the cool night air. I got into my car and drove back to my fortress. The fallout was swift. Timothy couldn't pay. He had no liquidity. The construction firm was liquidated to pay the creditors, me. I dissolved the company, sold the equipment, and kept the software rights. Mark called off the engagement the next morning. He was a decent guy. He didn't want to marry into a crime family. Isla lost the fiancé, the Tesla, and her reputation when the truth about the theft came out. Carrie sold her jewelry, her designer bags, everything she had to pay me back the $28,000 to avoid jail. Took the check. I donated it to a charity that helps at-risk youth learn to code. I sit in my apartment now. It's quiet. The servers are humming. I deleted their numbers from my phone. I don't know where they're living now, and I don't care. People ask me if it was worth it. Revenge is sweet. It's not sweet. It's quiet. It's the silence of a room where no one is yelling at you. It's the peace of knowing you are safe because you built the walls yourself. Success isn't just money. Success is the power to say no. It's the autonomy to build a life that no one can take away because no one gave it to you. Built this. Every line of code, every dollar, every moment of peace. If you've ever had to build your success in silence to protect it from the people who should have supported you, share this story. Let's remind the world that the quietest moves are often the deadliest.